hoping that by the end of this session, we will be able to share this out with the wider world. And I want to say a couple things about this before we jump in. Number one, there's a lot of debate on the internet, think pieces and stuff about like, is Zoom theater or not? From where I'm sitting, I'm not particularly invested in that conversation. I'm invested in artists, and I'm invested in community, and I'm invested in the opportunity that we have to examine practice and examine how we gather. So if it's in a digital space right now and it's looking like we're going to have a year of this, so be it. The work is the work. And we all are kind of aware that nothing will take the place of live theater. So everything that we're doing in this practice is trying to just approximate that and using what's available to us from wherever we are to gather people and to like move ourselves towards the work. And also just simply to give artists a chance to practice their work, even if it's in this very imperfect platform. The second thing is that Zoom, as we all know, and I'm sure many of us have been on it 24 hours a day at this point, Zoom is a meeting platform. So everything that we're talking about today is sort of rigging a conference platform to try to like make some high art out of. So that is an inherently imperfect practice, but we think we have some good tips for how to do that. And finally, what we share today is not the only approach, right? I'm sure many people on this Zoom I'm seeing names on this of really smart people who are filmmakers and theater producers and artistic directors and leaders and play development folks and professors. There's all kinds of people that are sitting on this Zoom right now. And I'm sure that you have accumulated some best practices and also a robust list of questions too. At the end of this Zoom, I'll invite some folks to unmic and unmute and kind of we'll jam together. But for the remainder of this Zoom, I'm going to ask you to leave yourselves muted and leave yourselves with the cameras off. So throughout this, my co-hosts, Ben and Annie and Harry, if you just kind of like patrol the list a little bit and make sure people's mics are off, that would be most helpful. All right, here we go. I have some notes here and I'm just gonna kind of punch down this list. Nobody prefers Zoom to the real thing. So we're gonna just sort of like look at, I'm going to invite you to think about what we're doing today as like approximating a theatrical process from top to bottom. And that means thinking about from gathering your artists all the way through the performance to the post-show kind of engagement that you'll do on a Zoom. So when you do a Zoom reading or Zoom piece of theater, we strongly encourage and for our work require a rehearsal process on the Zoom with all of your artists present. So this will require you to get a Zoom platform. Okay, there are two primary types of Zoom platforms, and I'll talk about them briefly, then I'll go into the process. One is the regular Zoom like we are on today. We actually have webinar for our Queen's Theater platform, but today we're doing regular Zoom just because it's the most common type of Zoom that people use. So there's webinar and there's regular Zoom. In regular Zoom, it's the kind that we all do where anybody can join a meeting and then everybody in the Zoom has the ability to unmic and turn their cameras on and off and things like that. And this is the type of Zoom that requires the most work to make it theatrical or to make the idea of the audience, because you'll have to go into the permissions and basically try to take away as many permissions from folks who are not artists on the stage as possible so you can get the cleanest view of the artists, and we'll go through that. The other version is webinar. Webinar is a more expensive platform. It's about $40 a month starting, and depending on how many audience members you want, it can scaffold up in price. It can get pretty pricey. But the benefits to webinar is that you have panelists who are kind of like people who can share the screen, and then anybody else who comes onto the webinar version will not have mic and will not have camera ability, so it's easier to sort of like accumulate an audience with less work at the beginning of that process. The benefit for regular Zoom is that people can choose their own adventure. Again, you have speaker view and you have gallery view, and in regular Zoom, you can always choose speaker view or in gallery view. And in the webinar version of Zoom, you as the administrator have to control speaker view or gallery view. There's often, unless you're very rigorous in your settings, not a way for a participant viewing to switch their view style. So you're controlling that, that for them. As we move through this process, we're going to do some screen sharing, and I'll show you what those settings look like so we can kind of like take our best stab at them. The other benefit for webinar, and you can also do this in regular Zoom to a certain extent, but the other benefit of webinar is you have the ability to cast really cleanly. So that means you can link it to your Facebook page and you can do a live Facebook stream. We just did it at Queen's Theater last week for our making series, which is about baking and like sheltering in place. Like we had Oliver Butler, Broadway director, come on and teach us how to bake a very simple bread at home. And we did it on a Zoom with participants who were baking and cooking along, and we broadcast that on the internet and through our Facebook page and Instagram page, and people were able to follow that way as well. And then it saved that and capture that, and we could share that out. And that's sort of what we're going to try to do here today with this Zoom, though it's not currently streaming on our Facebook. All right, so those are the sort of two types of Zoom. And again, most of what I'm talking about today is the regular version of Zoom, which is how we're gonna move people through it and the thing that most people will use in this practice. But thinking about this as a theatrical experience. So talking about casting, scheduling your rehearsal, scheduling your performance, thinking about a ticketing mechanism, thinking about your actor call, calling people 30 minutes on your Zoom, opening house 15 minutes before your Zoom, doing an introductory speech or kind of framing things to just make sure everybody's on the platform and understands what we're doing and understands the settings they're supposed to use, the performance itself, and then at the end, practices for audience engagement, like how to make how to unmic people so they can clap, or how to invite people to the screen so you can do a little post thing or feedback thing. But thinking about it all the way from the ground up. So when you're scheduling a Zoom reading or Zoom performance, please schedule a rehearsal. This will require you to go into your Zoom platform and schedule 2 meetings, one for your rehearsal and one for your performance. I strongly suggest that everybody who is going to be on your Zoom performance participates in that rehearsal process. And what that entails mainly is microphone check and camera check, making sure that the mics work and the cameras work and that the internet speed works. I will preface this by saying all of the things that I'm talking about today are under the assumption that everybody participating with you as an artist has adequate internet connection. And if you are unsure of that, it must be tested. And if you're choosing to include somebody who has patchy internet service, and not all of us in the world do, it is a privilege to be on the internet. But make sure you have a contingency plan, like if the actor drops off, rehearsing who picks up that role, whether it's a stage manager person that you're having, or if it's another actor or what have you. In scheduling those Zooms, I would also recommend that if you, as the director facilitator of your Zoom, serving as the admin, that is great. I would strongly recommend enlisting an additional collaborator for you to serve as a stage manager admin. And today I have co-hosts who are some of my directors from our 1 Minute project who are letting people in from the waiting room and things like that. So as I talk, I don't have to be doing 2 things at once. It also allows somebody like to kind of patrol your list. If people unmic, they can help mic them up. If people turn their camera on, they can turn the camera off. They can communicate with actors as though they're backstage. So really, a stage manager or an administrator kind of person can be a really invaluable tool to make your experience really clean. But on your Zoom rehearsals, make sure that you are doing everything that you would do in a reading. So if you're practicing turning your cameras off and on, and we'll get to that in a little bit, understanding what that looks like and who's doing it, know that you as the administrator or the stage manager person cannot control who goes on and off the cameras very cleanly. The actor really has to do it. So it will entail getting your actors on the screen and making them either co-hosts in regular version or panelists in the webinar version, so they can control going on and off camera and miking themselves on and off. And just practice everything that you would be doing in the show during that rehearsal time in real time. And then when we get past that point, thinking about, thinking towards show day, thinking about a ticketing mechanism. And I say this as, it's like maybe a slight thing to share in this space, but it is important. As you've all seen, I was on a call earlier this month where we were on a Zoom that was unprotected, and it got porn bombed. And what I mean by that is somebody came on, they shared their screen, it was porn, it lit up the whole room. There were like 300 people on the Zoom, and they had to spontaneously cancel this meeting. And people are getting porn bombed left and right on Zoom who are sharing unprotected Zoom URLs. So like, for example, if you set up a Zoom and you say, here is the URL for today's meeting, put it on Facebook, anyone can find it and jump on and share that stuff. So we're going to try to use some best practices today, and I'll show you some settings for how to like avoid that. But the very best practice is to set up a Google Doc, or if you have a theater company, through your ticketing system, a free mechanism for people to sign up and have it either auto-generate the URL with the instructions. Here's the link for the meeting. Here's the ID. Here's the meeting number, like we did today. You had to sign up through this form, and I emailed you the link as opposed to just posting it on social media. That is a form of protection. And that's the best way to ensure that your experience will be uninterrupted. In the webinar version, it's less of a concern because people won't have the ability as viewers to take over your screen. But for this regular version, it's pretty important. So thinking about the ticketing timing, when you are saying to people, here's a Google Doc that you're signing up, I will email you the URL and the meeting ID 2 hours before the performance, or 24 hours before the performance. Or what we did for our project is we did it day of twice. We did it once early in the day, and then for everybody who kind of last minute came down, we emailed it out again to the additional folks right before the performance, because many people will sign up for your event thinking that the URL sign up form is actually getting you on the Zoom. They don't completely understand always. So you have to kind of like be rigorous and send that extra push right before it happens. And again, recommending you as the administrator starting your Zoom 30 minutes before curtain time, calling your actors, again, reconnecting to screen sharing and microphones, making sure everything works the same way that it did in your rehearsal, and practicing a little bit to make sure that everything that you did is up to par. And then opening the house procedures. We generally tell actors once you've done your rehearsal to leave yourselves off camera and turn your mics off. And then somebody, an administrator, myself, one of the directors, would stay on the screen and welcome people into the Zoom. Now, presumably we had preset it so people's mics and cameras won't turn on when they come in, but some people come in and turn themselves on. So we either do two things. We either put up a slick graphic, which we'll show you how to do at the end of this on the screen. It says, please, here's the optimal things for your setting. Or somebody simply stays on the screen and says a million times, hi, thanks for joining. Please turn your cameras off and your mics off, like we did today. And that ensures that people kind of get it and they don't take over in the middle of the show. And then when we begin the show, we tend to do a little curtain speech like you would in a theatrical show or a reading. Either the director, the playwright, or the administrator comes on and just says a little bit about what the project is, reminds everybody who's joining the Zoom late to turn things off and all of that. And also to just be sure to rigorously frame the project that we're doing and why we're here. And remind people, if you're going to do something at the end, that you will prompt people at the end to turn on their mics, and monitor this throughout. And I'll show you what that looks like as we move through. And then your performance happens, and it should kind of rip straight through. We'll talk a little bit about the different types of performances. And then at the end, thinking about a mechanism for clapping. So we can either say we'll invite you to clap and then unmute everybody and have them clap, or we'll invite people to the screen, or if you're on webinar version, invite people to open up your chat and invite people into the chat. So before I go into the styles of performance, I want to do a little screen sharing and take you through some of the settings that will help you set up your Zoom to like really eliminate as many opportunities for your work to get disrupted. So if you don't mind, I'm going to put you on screen share right now. There's my little baby. And I'm taking you into the Zoom, the back end Zoom thing. So when we're talking about settings, you have to log into your Zoom account on the desktop, and you go into your profile thing here, and it will come up with all this stuff. Profile, meetings, here's where you schedule the meetings. You can just do it right here. If you have webinar version, it will tell you what the webinars things are there. And then settings is really what our jam is. So just working through this settings, you know, audio type, telephone, and communication. You just want to use computer audio if you want to keep it, if you want to have people be able to come in from the phone, cool. Here's an important one, join before host. No, please disable that. That means that no one can get in there before you have a chance to come in and sort of open up the theater. Use a personal meeting ID and stuff. We don't recommend this for this type of engagement because we want to make it easy for people who haven't got on to Zoom to get on. Require a password when scheduling a new meeting. These are like the boring stuff. We'll get to the important stuff here. Mute participants upon entry. Please turn that on. That will mean when you come in, it won't let people take over the screen. It will automatically mute them, and they'd have to like do several steps to turn themselves on. So it defaults to keeping them off, and it helps you keep people off. That's a very important one. This stuff, chat, disable the chat. You can turn it on later, but at the beginning of a show, and we've disabled the chat today because many times when you're in the middle of a show, the chat function will start blinking and it will take over the screen. Private chat, turn that opportunity off as well. Auto saving chats will kind of go, all these settings, if I click this, all these things would kind of turn on. Here's an important one, play sound when a participant joins or leaves. Turn that off. That means if someone joins your show late, they won't do a ding when they get into the Zoom, they just quietly enter the room. File transfer off, feedback to Zoom, all this kind of stuff. Co-host, turn that ability on. Make all of your actors and participants co-hosts. Screen sharing, turn it on for today, but only hosts can screen share, not all participants. This is how you get porn bombed. If you let all participants on and somebody did get through, they can share the screen, and then it's really hard to unwind that. So make sure only hosts or co-hosts can share the screen. And all this stuff here about remote controls and allow participants to rename themselves. Very helpful if it's in your practice for people to say their full names. If you want to add gender pronouns to your practice, that would be a place to invite people to do that. And then all this stuff here, turn out breakout rooms off. That means people can kind of sidebar in the middle of your meeting. If you are leaning into accessibility in your organization or your practice, turn closed captioning on, turn saved captions on. There are a lot of accessible functions in Zoom, and they will be, there's different plugins and functions, and you can do live captioning with somebody typing. You can install a software that will approximate the language, but that's good too. Language interpretation, if you have an international audience, you can also turn that on, but make sure you have the right plugins to make sure that that software is really good. Virtual backgrounds, turn that on. Some of you from a theatrical perspective might want to play with backgrounds that you're using as like a scenic element. So make sure that you do a deep dive into that. This is all the boring, dry stuff, but it's also things that will help you make sure that you are rigging your Zoom to be like an audience in a stage. Turn the waiting room function on, like we did today, for all participants. The waiting room function allows people to kind of queue up, and you have to manually enter them so they enter the house all at once. So if you're calling actors early, they're waiting in the house. They're waiting in the lobby before you let them into the house. So when your actors are going backstage, by taking your cameras and mics off, you're turning this function on and you're hitting everybody enter, and they all come into the thing. Yeah, and this is stuff about recording, just setting your preferences to the recording and things like that. But those are the big kind of back-end settings on regular Zoom that you might want to use to investigate a little bit. So the big things are cameras off, chat off, waiting room on, screen sharing off, like just going through and making sure that there are as few options as possible. And at the beginning of your curtain speech, now that you've done that and everyone's gathered, we often use we often try to say, like, hello everybody joining, please keep your camera off and your mic off. It is like you're going into a theater and sitting down in the seats, and the lights are going down around you, and you're taking your seats in the audience, and anybody who's on the screen is on the stage. So if you turn your camera or your mic on, it's the equivalent to walking across the stage. So like setting the mental picture that like we're approximating the idea of theater is really helpful. Now I'm going to screen share one more time, but it's not going to show you, when it screen shares, it minimizes the thing. And I want to show you just a couple of other settings. So I'm going to screen share one more time from my desktop. And here in in real time, this will be at the bottom of your screen, but when you're screen sharing, it defaults to the top. So you can also ask your actors to go, when you call them, into this arrow next to the microphone and go into the audio settings. And one thing that we found really helpful is here at the bottom, there is a button that says press and hold spacebar to temporarily unmute yourself. Enable that and have each individual actor or anybody who is in your practice make sure that this is clicked, okay? Same here at the video, hide non-video participants. Make sure that that is clicked. And we'll also talk a little bit about how to do that on the regular screen. But I can't show you because we're mirroring right now. But those two settings are particularly important because you can have actors automatically default to mute, and when they come on camera, they can hold their space bar, and it's like taking the lid off and they can speak, and when you release the space bar, it puts the lid back on and they can't. So you don't have people coughing in the background and things like that. The actors can control their microphones with a single action. And looking here on the top of your screen, again, right now we're saying be in speaker view, but if you go to the non-video participants, that little thing at the top of your screen, and you click the little arrow, it says show non-video participants or hide non-video participants. I would recommend hiding the non-video participants. And this way, it doesn't have black boxes of people who aren't on camera on your screen. It will keep your screen really, really clean throughout your performance and things like that. So that's the sort of best practices when you get everybody in the room to kind of say, here's the once now we're all gathered, do these things together so we all have the same functionality. So that is the sort of basic back-end stuff for regular Zoom. Now, again, in webinar, when you go in, and I'm not going to show you that because we're not on a webinar today, you'll need to do that same kind of thing. Log into the back end, go in your settings, and rig your settings. One thing webinar can do is it can allow people to unmic themselves if you don't set it rigorously. So you need to go in and take the ability for participants to not be able to unmic themselves, and then you as the host enable the function for you to spotlight certain people. So if I wanted to go right now, like if I was on a webinar, I could hover over Chris Burney and I could tell him, Chris, speak, and I could unmute him temporarily, and I can control when he's unmuted and muted and give people to speak. They can't turn on their cameras in any way unless you make them panelists. But the microphone function in webinar is the only rigorous setting that you need to set. Now I'm going to move for a moment towards just some stylistic things that we can talk about in Zoom, and then I'll invite my colleagues to the screen to talk about their experience a little bit. But a couple of different styles. And again, everything that we're offering here is based on the fact that we know for certain that people's internets and their mics work really well. If for some reason you are including somebody who does not have adequate internet or sound access, I will recommend the most bare bones basic version of this, which is like having all of the actors on the screen. And for that version, it's like we tell the audience that it's like approximating a staged reading where there's chairs and music stands on the stage. And what we're asking people to do is to switch their view into gallery view. So it's all those little Brady Bunch cubes. And for that version, we're also having a stage direction reader live on or off the screen. And if you have a stage direction reader or something like that, what we found works relatively well is to have that person not on the stage, but have them unmiked off stage so that you can hear their voice, but you see the actors on the screen. We've also had it where folks are all on the screen, including the stage direction reader, and that also works okay. But if you're doing the version like everybody on the screen and you're not practicing entrances and exits, everybody on the screen, everybody unmiked, and tell the audience and the actors to go and put themselves in gallery view. Now, the other version of this that gets interesting, and some of our colleagues can speak to this today in a moment, is approximating what a show would be like with entrances and exits. There are two ways to really do that. And the first way is to have the actors control that in your rehearsal. So that would require actors to put themselves in gallery view. That will require actors to keep themselves on mute and unmute and turn the camera on when they're going on stage, and mute and turn their camera off when they're going off stage. And if you do that in gallery view, what you'll see is different boxes pop up with entrances and exits, and it looks really cool. You can get really intricate in the timing of that to make it feel like a show, like people are going on and off stage. You can also, in that version, play with things like costumes. We had a group that did all red costumes. Every time they'd come on, they'd be red. We had a group that played with backgrounds. Like there's a 1-minute play that took place in Antarctica. They went off screen. It was like this background, and they came back on the screen, and they've used the images of the background. And I should actually take this opportunity to screen share one more time and show you where that functionality is. So in the video function, can I go there? Okay. There is a virtual background cue. So here you can go on the internet and download as many virtual backgrounds your heart desires, and you can add them right here in this add function, and they show up here. Now, the best practice is, unless you have a blank wall behind me, I do not. So if I turn my virtual background on right now, it looks pretty okay. But if you wrote, I have a green screen, and you did it, it looks like dog shit, right? So make sure you unclick, I have a green screen. And that way you can do this. But these are a little tricky. So if you zoom in or out, you can get lost a little bit. But generally speaking, if you're sitting forward in your chair, kind of in front of the background, it won't screw you up too bad. But you can do that where you can go off camera, have both people download a picture of an iceberg and come back on, and they're all of a sudden they're like this in Antarctica. And you can get really tricky with costumes and props and backgrounds when you're doing the off and on screen function in gallery view. Now, the other thing is you can do speaker view. And speaker view would be putting all of your actors on the screen and then encouraging people to, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna turn my, excuse me, my baby is taking a nap and the monitor is on. So let me just turn that off so we don't hear her crying in the middle of this Zoom session. But you can encourage the audience to put it on speaker view. And that allows, that's leaving it to fate. That allows the Zoom platform to kind of do some of its own editing. I find this approach less good. I also know that some of our colleagues used it and they were personally satisfied with that approach. I personally think it's better when the actor controls their own entrance and exit and not leaves it to the whim of the platform. But if you put it on speaker view, what Zoom will do is we'll do some natural editing where it will pick up whoever's speaking and it will cut to that person. The challenge is that if you do that, it won't be clean. So like you could be sitting here like this and hear someone speaking, and then 4 lines into it, it will cut to them. So if you're totally okay with the chaos of chance, that is an approach you can take. I find it frustrating to watch that way. I also found that in watching it that way, I learned some things about kind of just giving up and letting seeing what happened. So there was some interesting kind of experimental quality to it, but it wasn't controlled and it wasn't specific. And I think most of us who are practitioners who are getting on this platform and why we're here today, we're looking for ways to be as rigorous and specific as possible. And so the other thing that I will say about gallery view and speaker view is if you are using the webinar version, you have to, as the administrator, control what the audience sees. They do not get to choose. So if you're doing speaker view, everybody will see the speaker view. And if you're doing gallery view, everybody will use that gallery view. So if you're using webinar, be really specific about which view you're setting it in for the audience. At this point, I want to invite my colleagues, Ben, Annie, and Harry to the screen. Hi, Ben. Hi, Annie. I don't know where Harry is. There's Harry. And I'll invite you to kind of unmic or let yourselves be heard on the platform. And I just want to kind of give, these are 3 of our 10 directors who just participated in our 10 days of 1-minute plays on Zoom. And we all watched together pretty much every night and looked at this worked, this didn't, that was cool, that's not cool. But let's just, I just want to kind of go around and give you a moment to talk about your approach in soundbite form, like a minute or so, starting with Ben, just about like what you did to think through your practice. Take it away.
Sure. So my name is Ben Ronan, he, him, his. I'm an MFA 3 director at DePaul University right now. And I've actually been exploring Zoom and what Zoom performances can be for a while now. So I think part of what this practice is our instinct is to go, what can Zoom not do? Because in reality, we want to all be with each other, because obviously. But if you change that mental model for yourself and don't look at what Zoom can't do, instead look at what it can do. So, for example, Zoom, as Dominic was saying, someone can just appear. So you can really play with entrances and exits, stop video, start video. So anytime a playwright ever writes, this person just appears. And as a director, I always struggle with that moment because I'm like, great, then I need a separate entrance that we don't use for any other part of the play. This allows me to do that. You can change location using a virtual background. You can also change location within your home. So if I'm at a dinner table doing a dinner time scene, and then I have a bedroom scene coming up, I can suddenly shift my computer, suddenly we're there. You can use voiceover in a really cool way. We had a lot of plays about technology and kind of technology running our lives. So having an actor on stage and then a voiceover be the quote unquote computer character was super helpful. You can also play with spatial relationships in a really interesting way. Whereas you can do an entire scene with your eye right there. You can do an entire scene very, oh my gosh, the most famous playwright ever who did a play about a mouth. That's embarrassing that he just left my mind. You can also change your name on it to your character name. So if I'm playing Hamlet, I can change my name to Hamlet. And then if I'm playing 500 characters, that will super duper help me. Also, one other best practices thing that I've learned, if you want the best internet connection, find where your router is and set it up right underneath your router. Your router points things down and around, so underneath is best. Also, 20 minutes before your performance, have each of your actors do a hard reset of your router. That means they unplug it, wait 1 minute, and then plug it right back in, which will give your router just a little bit of a break and basically it's like telling your router to warm up, which is what they do. And that is great and provides the best internet access. So I know I talked over a minute. Sorry, Dominic.
That's all right. That's great. Like Ben was from the start just like super tuned into some stuff that really works. So it's always valuable to hear how people's tips. I think it's also was helpful to just talk about Annie and Harry, like what approach you took if you did entrances or exits, or if you left everybody on the screen and why, just so people can get a sense of how you worked. So Annie, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Levy. I use the She series. I'm the artistic director of Emerson Stage, which is the producing arm of the BFA training programs at Emerson College. I did use the gallery view. One thing that I will say is that the ensemble for the 1 Minute Play Festival, normally, I think there were over 300 characters that came up in those 64 plays that we looked at. So I wasn't casting 300 actors. I put together an ensemble. I think it ended up with 7. And philosophically, what I specifically did is I put together an ensemble of students. I tried to use mostly seniors who had been cast in one of our 2 final season shows that were canceled with the pandemic. So that sort of led to the right attitude of the students who were involved. They were looking at this as a real heightened opportunity and sort of their own personal send-off from their undergraduate training program. It also meant, because they were undergraduate students, because all of their classes had moved on to Zoom, they were not afraid of Zoom technology at all, and they were not afraid to experiment, and they gave me ideas of ways that the technology could be utilized to really support the plays that they were in. Like I said, I did use the gallery view with the actors taking themselves on and off video. I also used an undergraduate student stage manager who was getting ready to graduate, who also, since nobody knows what the future is going to hold, our tech and management students are very interested in best practices in terms of being behind the scenes at a Zoom performance. So he got a lot out of that as well. Yeah, to back up everything that that Hamlet there has been saying, my actors really treated the entrances and the exits as their lines. So the crispness and the quickness and the specificity that they found helped move everything along. I'm a 2-time directing alum with 1 Minute Play Festival, so I understand that the pacing is one of the most important ingredients here. So that was the thing I was constantly letting them know. Pausing does not work on Zoom. All of those moments when you go silent to take your moment doesn't work at all. And we had 2 rehearsals, and it took a couple reminders to sort of get that out of their system, because that's something that actors are used to doing. You take your moment, you pause, you enjoy the silence. Does not work on Zoom at all. In fact, they all had to get into the habit of going faster than they normally would, because it's that speed and that urgency really supports the work and drives it forward. One other thing I want to talk about, we had 2 rehearsals, and there were 64 plays. No, the actors were not off book. So one of the things that they had to figure out, many of us are home without printers. So one of the things that we needed to figure out at our first rehearsal was, okay, how are you going to handle, where are your pages going to be? For the 2 actors who were able to print out their scripts, it quickly became apparent that you can't look down and look at the page. So they rigged something up by their screen, so they were always looking at the screen while they were talking, or they experiment with the most comfortable way of sharing the screen between the script and the Zoom meeting, so that they understood where they were in time and space. Yeah, the 2 rehearsals made it really exciting and urgent. I'm sure we could have benefited from more, but I think it was, one of the interesting things about 1 Minute Play Festival is when we performed it, the energy that the plays were written already seemed, they were already a week out, which felt like 20 years ago. So it was there was a real interesting immediacy and reflection that the actors got to understand, and they brought that sense of time to their performance, which was really exciting. So I hope any of that was helpful.
All of it's helpful. The thing about scripts, especially, huge, and pacing, huge. I'll second both those things and say that like pauses are deadly. And that's not just for 1 minute plays, that's for regular plays. Pauses on this platform read like a mistake. So in the things where actors are actually in a room with each other and they would feel out that space and that tension and like know when to speak, you have to approximate that, and you have to really look at how you can see each other on the screen to like move towards that approximation of what it's like in real space together. And when that is not honored and it kind of falls down, it's like a play when pauses take too long. You can feel the audience even on a Zoom like disengaging, and you can see the numbers in your participants list going down, down, down. And so we looked at 100% of these correlation between the plays that really like honored the pace and the participation, an audience holding steady, and the ones that we noticed a significant drop off through the things are the ones where those pace weren't honored. So as much as that is like, I don't know why that's true. I just observed over the 10 days that it is true.
Can I also jump in too really quickly and say, make sure you tell your actors not to look at the total number of video participants, because that's mine, and it started freaking them out, and it could be for 10 million reasons. They had to go, they had technological difficulties, everything.
So that's a very good point. And so what I did for that myself was like physically move the Zoom so the participants list off the screen. So just move your box this way. The other thing that I'll say before I want to give Harry a chance to speak, but the other thing that's popping into my head right now is background noises. So make sure, folks, that your browsers, if you have email up, you have Facebook up, you have any of that stuff up, close all that shit down. So the only thing that's on your screen is your Zoom window. Otherwise, an actors are speaking, you hear ding, 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 ding the whole day. And I didn't want to, I wanted to say that now because I know I will forget to say that. But Mr. Harry Waters Jr. In Minneapolis, tell us about what you did.
Got it down. Harry Waters Jr., I teach at McAllister College. I'm also a professional actor director. I'm going to try to do this as quick as we can. I had undergrads that were first years, and this was an opportunity because they had an acting one class for them to do something different. I had two actors that were part of it who were going to not get their senior performance in 12th night. So I really invited them. They were very grateful to have an opportunity. I want to say that I told them there are no mistakes because nobody's done this shit before. And also we had not done it before. So Ben sort of set the bar, but my students had not seen what Ben did. Also because of their other requirements of doing their other online classes, we had one rehearsal. And the only thing that helped was because I did not want to be on camera or doing the voiceover, I assigned two students to switch on the stage directions. It had its complications, but it was fun. And I think that's one of the things that we kind of forget about in these situations. This was a down and dirty experiment, so we learned a lot. I don't think there were any mistakes. We lost lots of people that couldn't handle it. It's like, that people walk out of the theater. As I told them, your audience is not up to you. It's like you all just need to go and roll forward with it. The one thing that I did have them do was they had their own props. I said, bring what you want. It enhanced my experience because they brought things that I didn't even know about. They heard me laughing so much off camera that was an enjoyable part of what I got to do. So there was not the pressure of having it be absolutely perfect and precious, I think is what sometimes we're missing about. We're in a process. People who are in grad programs have a different engagement with it. People that are having their own theaters have a different engagement, but I would also offer who's ever trying to do this, just be mindful of where you're coming in. A year from now, we're going to have a whole different way of doing this. Our Zoom will probably be on our hand. We'll be looking at everybody right there. Right now, it's in these rectangular screens, which I really hated. I just had my students put a sheet across the back so we didn't see their living room or their bedroom or their dogs coming through. We heard one dog at one point, but I think that was about it. I'm going to be short and sweet, say thank you all. It was a great opportunity.
Thanks, Harry. And I'm going to leave everybody on the screen. I think Harry really got at that whole the spirit of this thing in a really direct way, the entirety through this process. Harry was one of the directors who watched pretty much every night and engaged and cheered all the directors on and was really beautiful in the chat. But he also got his students on the screen and said, this shit isn't perfect. We're on Zoom. Things might go awry. Have fun. Live in the moment. And taking that pressure off really helped. So finding the way to like try to work towards a level of precision and rigor, and also remembering that we're not in a world like we're all sequestered at home, and we have to find ways to like honor that we're all learning in this moment, and that it isn't a perfect practice, and that we're trying to be pro artist and pro creation, and allowing a little bit of room for that error, and not to live in the world of perfectionism is really important. So Harry really helped us all the way through to kind of keep that in mind, and I thought it was a beautiful lesson.
You have to live in the world of fun.
Yeah.
Laugh at yourself.
So friends on the screen, I just want to take a couple minutes and kind of just do like what you saw a do and don't kind of thing. Like some things that we saw through the 10 days elementally that were really cool, and some things that didn't work so well. And I can start a couple of them by saying like costumes worked really well. Color. One of our directors, Francisco Solorzano from Barefoot Theater, had all of his actors in red, in variations of red in the background. So when they came on, it was red, 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 red. And it was an interesting kind of like tie, even though they were in different spaces, that they all had this color coordination that looked really well. One thing that didn't work really well was wireless Bluetooth mics. Consistently through the 10 days, I noticed that anytime an actor was unmiked and using a laptop, the mic output from the laptop worked way better than any sort of Bluetooth functionality, because the Bluetooth 100% of, and I don't know why this is true, I looked in the Zoom settings and I can just tell you that it was. There's a crescendo effect. So anybody who used a Bluetooth mic, they would start speaking and it would be like, and then here I go. So you'd miss the first 4 or 5 or 6 words that they said. And in a 1-minute play, or in really any play, you miss the beginning of the line, the whole meaning of that exchange can collapse very quickly. So I noticed it was a little better with wired microphones. They're plugging it in, but the Bluetooth ones always had like it started low and came up, and it didn't work as well. Some other things that I noticed, Harry's background, some of his students really leaned into lighting. So there's one of his students that had a black background and some really cool downlighting, and it looked like he was like in the actor studio or something, and like really transformed. Some other things that I saw were like backgrounds, like Ben had some cool plays where like they would go off screen and come back like in the wilderness, and it was like just really magical to see that happen, or and some of the other things. But generally I thought no mic worked better than mic. Color coordination worked. Props were fun. Backgrounds were fun. On and off stage were fun. And here's one that it's a little bit complicated to explain, but it's something we talked about a lot, which is if you're going off and on screen, if everybody suddenly, like directors, can we just practice this for a minute? Let's just turn our cameras off just for 1 second. So as you see, when our camera's off, it goes to this ugly screen, right? So turn your cameras back on. So if you're doing the thing where you are going off and on screen like that, if everybody is off the screen, it defaults to an ugly screen. You can do 2 things to combat that. Number 1 is always either practice rigorously where there's always one person on the screen. So never go all out. So like wait till the next person enters before you exit, kind of thing, so it doesn't go to that ugly screen. Or the second thing that you can try is loading a background image, which Barefoot Theater did and which Queen's Theater does. It doesn't always work because sometimes it will go to a speaker view thing. It's weird. But I think the best practice is timing your ons and offs. So like one person's always on the screen and one person goes off. But also adding a background graphic. So for any reason, if everyone does leave the screen, it will say 1 Minute Play Festival, Barefoot Theater, Queen's Theater, McAllister College, whatever. Instead of that ugly back-end screen. It's an eyesore.
We had one of our students who got us all to load in the McAllister Shield. So no matter what happened, it always went I mean, there were different versions of it, but it was always the McAllister Shield. And I saw
Right.
the Barefoot had done that as well. But just one other thing I'd like to I'd like to really share is I really appreciated particularly the Ben's group, and there was another, I think it was Barefoot Theater, is that the level of commitment that the actors were making. I mean, that's something different. You know, for me, it was good to see. I had to try and push my first year students who are afraid to speak, is that there are people who are professionals who are still struggling with this form, but there was an inspiration of bringing the professionals to this medium to also model. It's like watching the National Theater, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I could do that too. So I really want to just honor that. I appreciate the level that people brought their actors up to inspire others.
And I think that's a great point, Harry. Tina Parker from Kitchen Dog, who is not on screen, and she's a series regular on Better Call Saul, and she was on Breaking Bad, and she's like a big film person and runs this theater. And she said to her actors, she's like, don't play this like film, y'all. Like, don't do little choices in the thing. Play it like theater, play it up tempo, play it physically, play it rigorously. And that constant reminder really helped that group pop a lot. And so some of the other directors, Harry, Annie, some of the other directors, and Ben did that inherently. Everybody on the screen actually, really that up tempo thing, like not being afraid to make theatrical choices on these little screens, actually helped approximate that feeling. Anyone else, do's or don'ts? I want to just be mindful of time before I move into Jay, but I just want to give you space to kind of jam, folks.
I have two quick things to say. One thing that you can't control right now, I don't know if Zoom is going to change the software so you can. If you have two people on screen, one's going to appear on top of the other. You can't have them side by side. So don't waste time trying to fight that to figure out a way to do it, because as of right now, you can't. The other thing, just in terms of directors interacting with actors on a Zoom platform, one of the things I had to tell my cast, my ensemble, is that you can't start at like a 3 and think that you're going to have time to build it. You have to come in with a higher level of intensity than you necessarily would if you were on stage, just because of, even though you're close to the camera, the distance between you and your audience, you don't know, people could be, people are watching from across the world. So it's got to start at a higher energy level than maybe you would have if you were doing this in a theater. Those are the last two things.
Also, really quickly, I know a lot of actors really don't like watching themselves act. I certainly wouldn't. So if you scroll right on your own box, it says mute, and then there's 3 little buttons. If you click the 3 little buttons, you should say mute my audio, stop video, all that. The last one should say hide self view. And if you do, then you will no longer be able to see yourself, which is really helpful. If it's a 2-person scene, you can literally just act with your partner.
Yeah, and I think it also, just be mindful that on the other end, if you're doing something with costumes or props or location or approximation, make sure that's on so you can see how that's landing. But I think to your point, it's sort of like, if it's a self-conscious thing, turn it off, and if it's a precision thing, leave it on. It's all in how you purpose that tool. Anything else, guys, that you saw do or don't? No. Harry's talking.
The other cover of when you have an actor whose mic just goes askew is that you need to have somebody that can come in right away and go like, okay, we're going to pick it up.
So that
also, the
happened to you, right?
idea of there was one challenge, I'm not sure who it was. Their stage manager was having so much fun laughing that he missed some of the stage directions. So stage managers have to be sort of consistent. They can be a part of the company, but they got to keep the machine, keep the train going.
Yeah, and I would say that is a consistent truth throughout. Whoever's reading your stage directions needs to be very engaged. So I forget, in one group we had, everybody was really up tempo and their stage direction reader was like this, right? And it was like, I forget what group it was actually, but it was like, engage a little bit. It's really helpful, but also be mindful of when you're on and off mic. So again, going to that audio setting, using your space bar functionality to unmic yourself and mic yourself back up is incredibly helpful. Before I turn over to Jay Rogers, Director Pals, any other words of wisdom or advice for our audience here? We're just a few minutes over time, so I'm going to move quickly into Jay. But that's okay. We're all friends here. So I know that we said we were going to keep it an hour. We are at an hour. So if those of you who are on the Zoom want to keep going, that's fine. If you don't feel like you're held hostage, you can leave it at any time. But our plan is to wrap up with these folks. Introduce my colleague from Queen's Theater, talk about graphics, of how to load those in a little bit, and then we'll turn it over for some audio only Q&A kind of stuff, or sharing if you have other best practices that we didn't hit today. So director friends, any final thoughts before we move forward?
Trust that we're learning this as we go. And also, what I'm trying to do is get in touch with my other colleagues that we're doing this so we can share some best practice.
Yeah.
I have to run, but if anyone at any point has any questions about Zoom or its features, I'm sure obviously you can talk to Dominic, but also feel free to shoot me an email or friend me on Facebook. Any of them, happy to help with anything.
Thanks so much, Ben.
And I guess just last words to lean into the acceptance that this is a tool we have to play with while we're all outside of the theater where we prefer to be. But yeah, let's accept this and see what we can do.
One thing I'll say about all of these artists and what made this project a pleasure is that all the people on this screen were like just incredibly generous humans who asked big questions to begin with. So while our medium is changing from being with each other to this digital platform, like leading with the spirit of generosity and inclusion and visibility and acceptance and love, and making work with your heart, that shines through on this platform. And if you're committing to the work that you're making, it will show up. And if you aren't, it is palpable. So if you're going to commit to doing stuff on this very imperfect space, go big or go home, because nothing's more torturous than watching, I'm not talking about our projects, but just some of the other things that I've seen with webinars or with roundtables where people aren't leading with passion and they're droning on. You're just like, geez. So just make sure that your work is leading with that same generosity and excitement that you would in space. So directors, hang on. I know Ben has to run, but Harry and Annie, thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much. Harry and Annie, I'm going to invite you off camera, and then at the end for Q&A, I'll invite you back on to just take any questions. But Jay Rogers, if you can take the screen, if you're still there, I think you are. Jay Rogers? Okay. Jay, unmute yourself. I'm going to put myself on, take camera off and mic off so you can just talk about where in the back end to load in graphics and what that looks like. Thanks. I don't know what happened, Jay.
Well, I tried to put together a little something like on the fly there. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you guys saw what I was just doing there. I just wanted to do like a quick attempt at just a quick slideshow to put up on the screen, just to do a very, very brief demonstration. And just to give you a little bit of an idea on how you can accomplish these things when your resources are limited. Yes, I'm in a unicorn snuggly thing because I like it. So let's just get into it really quickly here, just so you can kind of see some of the stuff that I'm working with. I'm going to do a screen share here so you can see. Let's see here. Is it going to let me do everything? No, it's not.
Jay, Dominic, you're just piping in to say if we can keep this to around 5 minutes, that would be really great.
Oh, yeah, that's not a problem at all. We'll get that done. All right. So The idea behind all of this is basically just to give yourself a little bit of a professional sheen, a little gloss, and you can do that by utilizing any sort of presentation software. If you're on a Mac, you can utilize Keynote for this. If you're on a PC, you can utilize PowerPoint. And those are sort of the entry-level beginner types of presentation software that lets you do something that's a kind of polished and nice and pretty. Without too much effort. And so I'm going to just walk through a very basic 3-slide presentation and then show you how to incorporate it into your Zoom. So I'm going to do a share screen here, and we're going to go into PowerPoint. All right. And we should be here now. Let me just clear these out. All right. So we're going to start with our first slide here. You just hit a new slide and blank. And all you really have to do is just put in your assets. In some cases, you may have a folder that has, oops, I'm on the wrong one here. Let's see here. Oh, that's my Zoom slides. I have a folder for my logos for Queen's Theater that I can just pull out of that and just drag into my screen here. In this case, I'm just going to go super simple just because we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to just drop in a little bit of word art here. And we're going to say hello and welcome. All right, so there's the first piece of that. Now you can also highlight it and take it and line it up. And you see those dotted red lines. Those will give you some centering guidelines here. This also, on mine by default, it defaults to a 16:9 ratio for your slide. And that is, in most cases, what people have through Zoom as well. So now we have our first slide here, and we're going to go on to our next one, and we will drop something else in here. Again, if you know how to use PowerPoint, basically you can do whatever you know how to do in PowerPoint. You can utilize that and put it together as a slideshow to put up graphics, slates, interstitials, all kinds of things. You can really think about it in terms of television production instead of theater production if you want to look at it that way. Let's see here. I'm going to throw in another. Here's the second slide. And then I'll just do a third slide and new slide, blank. All right. And one more little bit of text, or I'll just do a circle, smiley face. All right. Okay, cool. So that all looks great. That's lovely. And then all you have to do to really start it up is just go to slideshow from the beginning, and it actually takes you into a full screen mode here. Now, let me come off of the share here and just see if I can maybe point out something on here. I wanted to show you some of the locations where things are on the Zoom interface here. Unfortunately, I cannot share my own Zoom window, so you're just going to have to listen to me and maybe click along with me to find where these things are. When you go to a share screen here, you've got that little caret that pokes up there. You can click on that, and that gives you another location for the setting to allow people to share. Particularly, you want to have the one participant can share at a time, just so that you have more control over that. And you have some advanced sharing options there as well. And Dominic covered these a little bit earlier, just in terms of how you can control who actually carries off those graphics, because this is all accomplished through a screen share. When you click on the share screen button, it actually gives you a number of options. You can choose any of the windows that you have open, or if you have started your PowerPoint presentation in the background, you select that, and that will open up your slideshow. Now, this interacts with the world pretty much the same way you would with a regular instance of PowerPoint. We have not done anything in terms of automated transitions or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is just show you how you can create something out of this to have an automated carousel of images, basically. So we have these three here. What we can do is if you click on each of the slides over here in the left-hand side, select all of them, and I just did that by clicking the top one, holding down the Shift key and clicking the third one. and then go to your transitions tab. And in this case, we're just going to do a fade. All right. Now, I selected all three, so that fade applies to all three. Have a look over here in the top right-hand corner, and you'll see that the options to advance the slide can either happen on a mouse click or after a certain period of time. So when you run the slideshow, you either have to manually control it, or if you prefer, you can just have the slides automatically advance after, let's say, 5 seconds. So now we can pull that up, slideshow. And I need to share the presentation screen again. So give me 1 second. From beginning, come on. All right, and let me see here. All right, here we go. You should have the screen up now. It says hello and welcome. I'm not touching anything, and the slides are automatically advancing on their own.
Thanks.
Look at that.
And Jade, this is where folks, Jay has smiley faces, and here's the second slide, but you can say, keep yourselves on mute. Hello and welcome. A graphic of your theater company, a slate of the artists who are involved in who's reading what, any information that you would in a playbill, any information you want for folks, how you want them to behave on your Zoom.
That is absolutely correct. Now, there's one final thing that I just want to share with you,
real quickly,
and then you can really just go to town on this in terms of how you build these things out. So what you may have noticed in that most recent one is that we played the slideshow, it advanced on its own, but then when it stopped, it just stopped and it went to a black screen. So there is a setting that you can choose with that as well. And that setting is to set up your slideshow. If you see right here on this screen, if you click on that, it'll give you, hopefully you can see the dialog box that just popped up. But it'll give you underneath setup show, there's under the show type box, you have it presented by a speaker, full screen, browsed in by an individual in a window, or browsed at a kiosk, full screen. That's one thing that you want to do. In the box next to it, you have, or I'm sorry, not next to it, beneath it, you have a box for show options, and there is a check here that says loop continuously until escape. So if you are setting up a set of slides to play manually or play automatically at the top and the end of the show, just to advance through that carousel, you want to loop it so that when it gets to the last screen, you don't wind up with that black screen that just says end of slideshow plus escape. You want it to start over from the beginning. And that is where you find that option. So when we load that up again, and I'm going to, let me put that back on the screen for you. These are on, I think I put it on 6-second rotations here. And there you go. Again, hands-free, not touching it. It's like magic. Whee, smiley face. And then we're going to loop right back around to the very first slide. And there you go. And you can just let that run. I typically, when we do these things for Queen's Theater, I set this up about 15 minutes before the event starts, just so there's something going. You can also utilize the mirror your computer sound to put a little bit of a music bed or something like that, just to give some sort of additional thing other than just the visual.
Okay, we're running, I'm sorry to cut you off. We're running out of time very quickly, and people are texting me that they have questions and I have to go.
Yep, so, no problem. But that's basically all that I wanted to show you. You know, and you can take it from there and run with it in whatever way you like.
Leave yourself on the screen, Jay. Harry and Annie, make your way back on. And folks, we just for like a 5-minute jam session, I'm going to invite you who are listening to not put your camera on, but just unmic yourself if you have a question, or use the hand raise function, which is in your sidebar, and I'll call on you if you have any questions or things that you want to explore. Either tell us or raise your hand and we'll call on you.
They have the hand raise
sidebar. Chris Burney.
Thank you. Great presentation. Have you on this platform done anything interacting with the audience after these readings?
Yeah.
And if so, how has that worked?
So 2 things that we've done. And I thank you for asking it because it's important. Number 1 is if you're on regular Zoom, at the end of our shows, we have said, This is the end of our play. I'm gonna unmute you now, which is down as the administrator. You can hit mute all or unmute all. I'm going to unmute you all now, and I'd like you to give a round of applause, and we can unmute everybody, and they clap. Then at that point, you can also mute them back up and say, if you want to like hang out, I'll invite you to turn your cameras on and mics off, and we can kind of round robin. And what we did for our thing is just sort of get everyone on the screen and say, where are you coming from? LA, Italy, da 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 da. And then how are you thriving and surviving? I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And like, what did you see in the plays that you liked? I like this one, I like that one. But you have to like really facilitate it like you do with the Ghostlight thing. But first I really do believe that taking people off mute at the end and inviting people to clap is the thing about this that made it feel the most like theater, because you won't hear audience reactions throughout, but you will hear that thing at the end that reminds you that there's a big room of 100 or 200 people listening, and it's a beautiful thing. But to your question, yeah, you have to kind of mute people back up after that and then facilitate in the way that you would a Zoom session or a Ghostlight happy hour or something like that. Ghostlight happy hour. That's Chris Burney's. Chris Burney hosts a thing twice a week where he just gets people on. He asks them where they're coming from, kind of like a story circle, and then invites people to kind of share, and then a list of questions that you answer. Some are serious, some are funny, and it's a really great thing. I've done it a few times. I'm going to go to Scott Weinstein. Hi, Scott.
Hey guys, thanks all so much for this. Kind of a related question. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts to like combating that feeling of performing into a void, like specifically with comedy where we're thriving so much on an audience reaction that we're not getting in this medium.
Yeah, I have one thought only. I've heard from my comedian friends who are doing storytelling shows or virtual stand-up that the other performers leave themselves unmiked, so the other performers laugh. So you can hear it that way. It's not perfect, but it's a little bit. It gives you a sense of what that is. I think for our work, the folks who left everybody on the screen, the stage reading version, we're all in gallery view, we're all unmiked. You can hear the other actors laugh a little bit, and as Harry pointed out, a stage manager at one point to a detriment. But you can kind of do that and address that tastefully throughout. But
I would also say trust your actors. You know, that if it sometimes something that's not funny in that thing is going to like show up because of their reaction on camera, and sometimes a thing that you maybe rehearsed that was going to be so funny, just like so it has a real theater component to it. Of like comedy is going to be new as well.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Scott.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm going to jump to Laura.
Hello, everyone. 3 questions. First is the sound. How did you manage the sound from computer outside? Then between the shows, I don't know. Unfortunately, I haven't seen them. But do you suggest to do a PowerPoint like we just seen, or to have someone live saying, okay, now we are going to this and this and that? And then the last one is, if it's Dominic, do you think, or everyone, is to do a Q&A or the applause afterwards is going to be too confusing if you have too many people talking? Or how really to moderate that? Because I'm not sure I'd
like to address number 2 between shows, because the playwrights all ended their plays differently. I just ask permission to always say at the end of each one, end of play, because it's a 1-minute play. Sometimes they were 40 seconds, but to say end of play, that way we would know we're off to the next one.
But other things too, just like I think the biggest thing to that is be intentional about directions, right? We're on Zoom, treat it like a stage reading. We're pro stage directions, we're pro end of play. We're pro anything that gives the audience information to locate us in place. The third thing that you said about applause, you control that. You can say, we're going to invite you to applause, and you can unmute people, have them clap, and when that runs its course, mute people back up. And for a Q&A, you have to facilitate that. So you can invite people on camera, like we are right now with this Q&A. We're saying leave yourselves off camera, unmute yourselves when you speak, mute yourselves back up when you're done. And for the second thing about slideshow, I think if you're taking intermission, if you're doing a full-length play or something, I don't know why you would, but I think, yes, slides or any information visually on the screen is most helpful. I don't know if we'll get to everybody's questions, but I'm trying to move very quickly.
And sound. How
So
you deal with sound?
We said earlier in the Zoom, use the computer over the microphones. We found consistently that the input from the computer works better than.
No. What I'm talking, if you want to put some music or something.
Yes.
Right.
So,
let me jump in on that one. So that setting is underneath the share screen dialog box that pops up when you are starting your screen share. On the PC version, it may be different on Macs. In the bottom left-hand corner, there is a checkbox that says Share Computer Sound. That will just broadcast whatever is running over your PC's sound card, basically. So if you have a radio that's playing in the background, like a Spotify or a Pandora or something like that, it will just take that signal and push it through. I want you to be careful and cautious and aware, particularly when you're doing public events, to be mindful of licensing concerns. If you do want to utilize music, then you need to find a royalty-free edition. There are some internet radio stations that allow that. And there are lots of sound clips out there as well that you can utilize. So you can even just set up a local playlist on your computer and push it through that way.
Thanks, Jay. I'm going to move through this really quickly, and I apologize if we don't get to everybody. We might not. Gabby Fox, go ahead. Quick question.
First of all, thank you so much, Dominic, as always, for taking the lead on these, and thanks everybody for your input so far. I did participate in the festival, and I think one of the best practices that I appreciated when I got the email, there was when people gave instructions on the best viewing, that was helpful. But I wonder, and you kind of touched on it, but it's a little complicated, and with everybody using different devices, what is the best way to tell people to hide the non-video participants? Because that seems complicated.
It's not. It's really easy, and I'll show you how to do it. So I'm muting you up, and I'm going to say this. If you're on webinar version, one more time, you control as the administrator how that's set up. The audience does not get a choice. So if you put it in gallery view, everybody sees gallery view, nobody can switch it. If you put it on speaker view, nobody can switch it. But if you, and I can't screen share, it won't show exactly, it will minimize my thing to the top bar, so it won't show it. But if you are on the screen, go up to the top where it says speaker view and gallery view. So at the top of your Zooms, there's two options. There's gallery view, which puts everyone in the Brady Bunch boxes. There's speaker view, which puts you in the person that's in the forefront. If you go to gallery view, there's a thing at the top that says total non-video participants 19. If you click down that caret, you will see show non-video participants and hide non-video participants. So most of the times on those performances, we would say at the beginning, put yourself on gallery view. Go and make sure you're hiding yourself from the screen. Now, once you're in gallery view, go to non-video participants, drag it down and turn it off. Unfortunately, in regular Zoom, if someone misses that instruction or they don't hear it or they don't do it, there's nothing you can really do about it midstream, but you just say those three things clearly. Turn yourself on mute, turn your video off, go to gallery view, go to the top where it says non-video participants, drag the caret, hide non-video participants. You can also do it if you're on the screen by hovering over your own box. You'll see a mute and an ellipses. The ... click it. You can also say hide self view, hide non-video participants from there. So there's actually two pathways. I hope that helps, but again, it's an imperfect practice. It's much more precise on webinar than regular Zoom, so you do have to model that. And I also say to Jay's earlier point, that's something you can model in your slideshow. You can just put a thing up, here's the best path as a visual graphic too. But unfortunately, it is not precise. I'm moving on quickly because I do want to make sure we're respecting our panelist time. Aaron Salazar, do you have a question? Go ahead, Aaron.
Yes. Sorry, thank you guys so much for facilitating this. Did you have to find that there was a hard decision to be made, that if you had a particular actor or actress and their internet just was not acceptable, that you just had to give a hard cut and not use them?
Yes.
For example, okay, copy that. Yeah.
Yes. Full stop, yes. No exceptions, yes. We did have one that crapped out twice during our thing, and we had to make a plan what actor would read it if they crapped out. We did have one group that committed to using somebody on a subpar platform, and they couldn't do on and off screen because their internet connection for this one actor wasn't enough. So they had to put everybody on the screen, and it was less creative. And I think they chose to include the human on the human level over like embracing the technology. So that's the kind of option you have to weigh. Is it more important to be inclusive, or is it more important to be technology forward and kind of examining the goals on a human level? But yeah, if that person's internet just isn't, and I think Harry, even on his own Zoom at one point, dropped off and we had to let him back in. And so yes, if that's why we say do a rehearsal, do a mic check, and if that person sucks, if they're technology stuff, you have to make some hard decisions in the moment who can cover the tracks.
Thank you.
You got it. Mary Davis. Mary, do you have a question? No? Okay. Well, Mary's hand's up, but the question's not coming. Lucia.
Hello, I'm on mute.
Hey, there you
Hello?
go. Mary,
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, you're talking about costumes, props, sets.
Yes.
Question, in the last week, I've been on many seminars because I'm a producer who is starting to direct. And they're talking about the fact that equity now has a new medium section, and they're saying that you can't be, because this is a new medium, that you can't just do that. And here we're talking about, and other seminars are saying you can, because I think they add tremendously to the whole situation. What is the reality? Does anybody know?
So I can tell you this. You have to work in accordance with your local equity and union guidelines. So for this, we use a lot of students, community participants, non-union participants. If you are working with a theater that has those permissions, as Queen's Theater, we've had some conversations with equity about do's and don'ts. They're shifting their views. I cannot, in good faith, advise you, nor will I advise you about what's appropriate to use who. You have to investigate that yourself as producers. For our project, we were very explicit that Annie and Harry and Ben and the theaters that produced it were serving as their own producers. They're responsible for their own content. They're responsible for their own actors. They're responsible for their own union guidelines. One Minute Play Festival did not produce it. We use it as an example of something. We provide the plays, and they were responsible for their own producing. We stayed in touch to give best practices, but every theater had to make that determination for themselves. So I cannot advise you on what is and is not appropriate on a union level. I will say you have to talk to them directly, and I will always advocate that honest and open conversation with your union representatives is the best choice. I'm going to kick it over to Jay Rogers, and I think that will probably wrap up our time. Jay.
I just wanted to add a little just heads up on that, because I've been in some conversations with equity. This is obviously uncharted territory, and they're figuring out where jurisdiction lies. I do know that they're working on some guidance that should be out next week that governs things like play development, readings, and things like that. If you're wondering about how pre-recorded stuff interacts and how that interacts with unions like SAG and AFTRA, they don't have any guidance whatsoever right now. So just make sure that you're talking and in conversation with your union representatives throughout all of it. Let them know what you're doing so that they don't come in and squash things that don't necessarily have to be squashed because they don't know about it.
Okay, thank you, Jay. There's one other hand up. Lucia, did you have a question?
Yes, hi, thank you. How are you guys? You mentioned earlier that when you set up a scene in gallery view, and let's say both actors like have an exit together, that there was a way to create a background that would override the ugly writing information things.
Yes.
How do you set up that background? Thank you, yes.
Jay. You're muted.
Oy.
There are a number of different, why am I still muted?
You're not. Go ahead.
Oh, there we go. Okay, there it is.
It's also in the Zoom setup functions that you can put an image in there.
Yes, and there's also sort of a quick easy way to do it, which is that if you set a virtual background on your camera, and then you turn the camera away from you, the only thing that shows up is that virtual background. That's a very quick and dirty way to do it, but it's also the fastest way to be able to do that sort of transition. Because when you're in that setup screen and you change your virtual background, it changes immediately.
Yeah.
So that is one way to do it. And then you just right click on yourself and you put yourself in the spotlight, and that's how you bring yourself to the front.
Thank you, Jay. Folks, I'm going to call this a time. We're 30 minutes past, but Harry, Annie, if you want to turn on your mics for a second, I just want to know if you had any words of wisdom, last thoughts to take us off of this this Zoom today. Not just about anything, but just anything you've been meditating on as artists or as makers.
Go, Annie.
Leave us with some words of wisdom.
So I'm teaching an undergraduate events directing class right now, and when we moved everything online, I changed their final piece to an exploration of digital performance. Mm-hmm. And I've also asked them to write a manifesto that will allow them to embrace or push back against creating digital performance, and yet can we consider it theater? And in conversations that I'm having with all of them, I watch them go, through the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages, and ultimately, as I said before, end up at acceptance. So, like I said before, just embracing what this can be. It may not be theater as we think of it, but it's going to be something, and it's a worthwhile investigation.
Great. Thank you, Annie. I have another friend of mine who just got hired at a university as an assistant professor, and he was hired because he knows how to do teaching online, and especially in, as I call it, experiential design, because he's also using art and performance together. So how do those things meld? What we're into right now is we're not going back to any new normal, we're in a new now. Our students, after they've gotten through their grief, and I've had to do a lot of coaching through that, their presence is actually giving us a way to move forward. I don't want to be just remove the boomers. I would be one of those that would be removed, but I'm really embracing the fact that the students are actually going to be the ones of how do we create a new kind of performance. They're used to using this medium, and how are we enhancing that and make it really professional, but also the height of art. That's what we're doing. We're going to be recrafting art with this new form, and also how are we staying human with each other.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. For me, I'll say I know that there's been a lot of think pieces and stuff shared about like all the artists should take a knee and like couch in these self-reflective questions. And there's a number of these opinions floating out that this isn't the moment to be creating. And I just want to beacon that most of us on this call are here because we are artists, or we are producers, or we are content makers. And it's really important that we get to frame and choose how we find inspiration, how we respond to crisis, how we respond to new challenges and new realities. And whatever we do, let's just make sure that we're keeping a fresh and clear commitment to our artists to continue to create, no matter if the medium is imperfect, that we don't subscribe to anti-artist sentiments, and that we get to choose our own adventures for when and how it's appropriate to find inspiration or forms and mediums to create. And that's how I feel about the subject of should we, or is this theater or not? I don't really care. I care about the work, I care about the artists, I care about the communities, and whatever centers the people who are making, whatever centers the stories, whatever centers the communities, that is going to be the right answer for now, and that's not changing for a while. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording. And I'm gonna make sure that we share this out on social media. You can find me D-A-N-D-R-E-A at queenstheater.org. You can visit the 1 Minute Play Festival Facebook website, #1MPF on social media. I'm gonna say thank you to Harry and Annie and Jay and Ben for their time. I'm also gonna say, I'm stopping the recording, and I can invite you to turn your, let me just